April 7, 1844. A biting, persistent wind sweeps off the Mississippi River, carrying the damp chill of early spring across the flats of Nauvoo, Illinois. In a sprawling natural amphitheater just below the rising, half-finished walls of the white limestone temple, a crowd of nearly 20,000 people stands packed together, shoulder to shoulder. They are shivering, wrapping their wool shawls tighter, shifting their feet in the damp dirt. They have gathered for the afternoon session of the church's general conference. But the atmosphere is heavy with more than just the cold. Just a few weeks prior, a beloved member of the community named King Follett was crushed to death while building a well, and his sudden loss has left a lingering cloud of grief and existential questioning over the city. On the rough-hewn wooden platform constructed beneath the trees, a 38-year-old Joseph Smith stands up to speak. He is physically exhausted, his face lined with the immense weight of a city under siege from internal betrayals and external threats. His voice initially strained as he tries to throw his words against the howling wind to reach the farthest edges of the massive assembly. He begins to speak, not with the rehearsed, comforting platitudes of a standard funeral sermon, but with an electric, almost desperate intensity that seems to push back the very cold of the afternoon. His hands grip the wooden railing of the stand as he looks out over the sea of upturned, expectant faces, men and women who have left everything behind to build a kingdom in the wilderness, many of whom are now wondering if their sacrifices have been in vain. As Joseph's voice warms, it gains a resonant, thunderous quality that carries over the rustling leaves of the grove. He does not merely console them for the loss of their friend. He begins to tear open the veil between the visible world and the infinite expanses of eternity. He tells the gathered thousands that to understand the dead, they must first understand the character of God, and to understand God, they must understand themselves. He declares that the mind, the spirit, the intelligent part of man, was never created or made at all, nor indeed could it be. He looks out at the shivering crowd and utters words that shock the traditional theological sensibilities of his era, declaring that the mind of man is as immortal as God himself, and that there are absolutely no boundaries or limits to the capacity of the human mind to expand, to comprehend, and to coexist with the divine. This is not just history. This is your life. The scene in that windswept Nauvoo grove, where a tired prophet stood on a wooden platform and shattered the theological ceilings of his generation, is the exact template of the battle occurring within your own soul right now. You are sitting in the echoing silence of your own perceived limitations, feeling the cold wind of frustration blowing through your creative and intellectual endeavors, wondering why there is such a massive, agonizing gap between what you feel you are called to build and what your brain actually has the energy or capacity to produce. You have felt the spark of grand designs, the sudden, brilliant downloads of ideas, concepts, and spiritual insights that felt so vast they made your chest ache with their weight. But then you tried to sit down and write them or paint them or build them or organize them, and you met the wall. You met the heavy, sluggish reality of physical exhaustion, of mental fog, of a brain that feels too small, too damaged, or too slow to translate the architecture of heaven into the language of earth. You have looked at your own cognitive fatigue, your struggle to focus, your memory lapses, or your lack of formal training and concluded that you are simply not enough, that the scope of what you can perceive is too narrow to ever fulfill the calling you carry. The enemy of your soul has watched this exact struggle, and he has used it to construct a very specific, highly convincing lie that he whispers to you in your moments of mental exhaustion. He tells you that your intellectual capacity is fixed, that your creative well has run dry, and that you have officially reached the absolute ceiling of your potential. He whispers that your brain is too damaged by trauma, too worn down by years of survival mode, or simply too average to ever comprehend the deep mysteries of your calling, or to execute the complex, beautiful work you feel prompted to create. He points to your unfinished projects, your abandoned notebooks, your moments of cognitive overwhelm, and your struggles to articulate the complex landscape of your inner world. And he says, "See, you are small, you are limited, and you are trying to reach for things that are far beyond your reach." He wants you to believe that the physical, biological limitations of your current mortal brain are the absolute boundaries of your eternal soul. He wants you to mistake the dust of your current vessel for the limits of your divine intelligence, so that you will stop trying to reach into the heavens for the blueprints of your destiny and settle instead for a small, safe, predictable life that requires no creative risk and no intellectual expansion. But Joseph Smith's declaration from the floor of that Nauvoo grove stands as a towering, eternal refutation of that whisper. When Joseph stood before that grieving, tired crowd and declared that the mind of man is as immortal as God himself, he was not delivering a piece of cheap, modern self-help motivation designed to make people feel good about themselves for an hour. He was laying down a fundamental, unyielding pillar of restoration doctrine. That the core of who you are, the intelligence that animates your physical body, is an uncreated, eternal substance that has existed for eternities past and will continue to exist for eternities to come. In the official minutes of that discourse, Joseph taught that the mind, the intelligent part, has no beginning and can have no end, that it is a self-existent entity that coexists with God himself. When he said there are no boundaries or limits to the mind of man, he was revealing that your capacity to learn, to create, to perceive, and to understand is not a product of your biological evolutionary history, nor is it a temporary gift handed to you at birth to be taken away at death. It is your literal, eternal nature. The prophet was standing in the midst of his own immense physical and mental exhaustion, surrounded by enemies who would take his life just a few months later, and he was declaring that the human spirit is an infinite reservoir of potential that cannot be permanently bound by the walls of mortality. To truly understand what this means for your current sense of limitation, you must look at the deeper doctrinal truth of the restoration regarding the nature of intelligence, specifically as it is revealed in the 93rd section of the Doctrine and Covenants. In that revelation, it is declared that intelligence, or the light of truth, was not created or made, neither indeed can be. This means that before your physical body was ever formed, and even before your spirit body was begotten, the core of your consciousness, your unique individual intelligence, existed. Your mortal brain, with all of its physical synapses, its chemical balances, its vulnerabilities to fatigue, trauma, and aging, is not the source of your intelligence. It is merely a temporary biological interface. It is a highly compressed, three-dimensional physical receiver that your infinite, eternal intelligence is currently using to interact with this fallen, physical world. Just as a low-resolution computer screen cannot fully display the infinite depth and color of a masterwork painting, your physical brain cannot fully manifest the vast, multidimensional complexity of your eternal mind. The friction, the fog, and the limitations you feel are not evidence that your intelligence is small. They are simply the evidence that you are currently operating through a highly restrictive, mortal interface that was never designed to hold the full weight of who you really are. This principle changes absolutely everything about how you must view your current creative blocks, your intellectual struggles, and your spiritual weariness. When you sit down to work on a project, to study a complex concept, or to seek revelation for your life, and you feel that heavy, frustrating wall of mental limitation, you must realize that you are not hitting the ceiling of your soul. You are merely hitting the ceiling of your physical biology. Your eternal intelligence is not tired. Your physical brain is tired. Your eternal mind is not confused. Your nervous system is overwhelmed. Your true self has access to the light of truth that has accumulated over endless eons of premortal existence, but that vast reservoir of knowledge is currently being funneled through the narrow, delicate straw of your mortal hardware. When you recognize this distinction, you can stop condemning yourself for your perceived intellectual failures. You can stop believing the lie that because you cannot currently see the way forward, or because you cannot perfectly articulate the vision in your heart, you are somehow disqualified or incapable. The gap between what you can sense in your spirit and what you can currently produce with your physical hands is not a sign of your inadequacy. It is the holy friction of an infinite soul trying to force its way into a finite world. If you are carrying a unique spiritual assignment, if you feel called to be a leader, a creator, a healer, or a builder in this dispensation, you must understand that the process of your preparation is not about filling an empty, limited mind with new information, but about training your physical vessel to yield to the pre-existing infinite intelligence within you. You are not a blank slate that needs to be written upon by the world's systems of education. You are an ancient, eternal intelligence that needs to learn how to master and discipline the physical brain so that the light of truth can flow through it without obstruction. The discipline of study, of creative practice, of prayer, and of mental focus is not about earning capacity. It is about widening the pipeline. Every time you push through the mental resistance to study, every time you sit down to write despite the feeling of inadequacy, and every time you choose to believe the eternal reality of your mind over the temporary exhaustion of your body, you are stretching the physical interface. You are carving out new neural pathways, training your physical brain to accommodate the higher frequency downloads of your eternal intelligence, and slowly dismantling the biological walls that keep your soul in shadow. The identity truth that you must anchor your soul in today is this: you are not your test scores, you are not your physical limitations, you are not your memory lapses, and you are not the labels that a limited mortal world has placed upon your intellect. You are an uncreated, self-existent intelligence that has stood in the presence of God, that understood the laws of the universe before the foundations of this earth were laid, and that carries an inherent, divine capacity to comprehend all things. The feeling of being intellectually or creatively limited is a temporary illusion of the mortal schoolhouse, a necessary part of the trial of faith where we are asked to operate with our eyes veiled and our spiritual senses severely restricted. The very fact that you feel the agony of this limitation is proof that your spirit remembers its true capacity. A creature that was truly small and limited would never feel the pain of being small. A bird that was born to live in a cage would not beat its wings against the bars until they bleed. Your frustration, your creative ache, and your longing for deeper understanding are the unmistakable movements of an immortal giant trying to stand up inside a very small, temporary room. Therefore, do not allow the temporary limitations of your current physical brain to dictate the scope of your vision or the scale of your obedience. If God has called you to write a book, to build a business, to master a difficult field of study, or to pioneer a new way of helping others, do not look at your current mental energy or your past academic records as the measure of your ability to do it. Step forward in faith, knowing that as you begin to act on the promptings of your spirit, the heavens will assist in expanding your physical capacity. The restoration teaches us that the physical body is not a prison to be escaped, but a sacred instrument to be sanctified and resurrected into its full glory. As you dedicate your mind, your intellect, and your creative talents to the work of the Lord, He will slowly but surely quicken your understanding, strengthen your memory, and expand your creative vision far beyond your natural, biological limits. You will begin to experience moments of divine flow where the interface of the brain seems to disappear entirely, and the pure intelligence of your premortal self pours through your hands, your voice, and your pen with a clarity and a power that leaves you standing in absolute awe. The hour is too late, and the work you have been sent here to do is too urgent, for you to remain trapped behind the false ceilings of intellectual self-doubt. The world is desperately crying out for creators, thinkers, and leaders who can bring down the true, uncorrupted light of heaven into the dark, chaotic systems of this earth, and that light cannot be accessed through mere mortal cleverness or academic training. It requires people who know how to tap into the infinite reservoir of their eternal intelligence, who are not afraid to stand before seemingly impossible intellectual or creative challenges and declare that there are no boundaries to what their minds can receive from God. You must decide today whether you will continue to live as a prisoner of your biological limitations, or whether you will step into the legacy of the King Follett Discourse and begin to live as an immortal being who is currently undergoing a temporary physical training program. The boundaries of your mind are not determined by your genetics, your past failures, or your current circumstances. They are determined solely by your willingness to believe what God has revealed about the eternal grandeur of your soul. Now, let us together break the power of the lies that have held your intellect and your creativity captive for so long. Let us put an end to the self-inflicted violence of comparison, the paralyzing fear of failure, and the exhaustion of trying to force an infinite calling through an untutored, neglected mortal interface. It is time to speak truth directly to the heavy, tired biological computer of your brain, to command it to align with the eternal intelligence that houses it, and to claim the infinite capacity that is your birthright as a child of the covenant. Speak these words with me, not as a desperate wish, but as a solemn, unyielding declaration of eternal law, sealing this truth into your mind, your heart, and your very bones. I release the belief that I am limited to what I can currently perceive or understand. My mind is not the ceiling. My current vessel is the ceiling, and ceilings are temporary. I declare that the core of my consciousness is an uncreated, eternal intelligence that is co-eternal with God, and that possesses an infinite capacity to learn, to create, and to comprehend the light of truth. I reject the lie that my mental fatigue, my cognitive limitations, or my past intellectual failures define who I am or what I can accomplish in this life. I recognize my physical brain as a temporary, mortal interface, and I commit to training, honoring, and sanctifying this vessel so that it can hold the full weight of my eternal calling. I open myself to the divine flow of revelation, creativity, and intellectual expansion, knowing that as I stretch my capacity, the heavens will quicken my understanding and widen the pipeline of my mind. I am not small, I am not limited, and I will not allow the dust of this earth to bind the infinite reach of my spirit. I am a chosen one of this dispensation, carrying an ancient, resilient intelligence, and I step forward today into the boundless light of my true identity, in the name of Him who has redeemed my soul from the grave. Amen.